My name is Jim Rutella, and I serve on the Chamber's Environment and Legislative Committee that is headed by Dave Ellenberg, the Council President of Avalon. This panel will bring together experts in economics, engineering, law, and government to explain some of the details and impacts that changes in flood insurance will have on homeowners, businesses, communities, and the entire county. Our first speaker is Dr. Richard Perniciaro, who holds a PhD in economics from Temple University and serves as the Dean of Facilities, Planning, Research, and the Director of the Center of Regional and Business Research at Atlantic Cape Community College. We're fortunate to have Rich as our local expert in economics and to talk about the public policy changes that are things like flood insurance, higher flood insurance, will have on our area. Rich?
Good morning. There we go. It's very interesting. We can be in Cape May County and talk about exciting things at the same time. So if anyone thinks they're an oxymoron, in the past 2 weeks, let's face it, we've talked about drones, windmills, summer flounder, and now national flood insurance. Oh my God, there's people out there. And so we'll get on. We'll talk a little bit about what the bill means. From an economist standpoint, they put me first for a reason. I'm going to talk a little bit, try to get a handle on what's going on, and talk a little bit about what I think the affordability study that's coming and what that should address as time goes by. Let's start with, I got the thing, let's make sure it works. Where am I pointing? The down one. Okay? Dun-dun-dun-bum-bum. All right. The left ear, okay? The gentleman there, that's the signal. And if I get an itchy left ear, we'll be done in 5 minutes. All right, let's do the statement of fact. As you all know, the National Flood Insurance Policy has changed what the shore and mainland communities look like. It just has since being put in, especially since the 1960s. The shore communities and the mainland communities would look different without national flood insurance. This also includes not only the residential sector, includes the commercial sector, which I don't see a lot of people talking about, and I think is very important that gets addressed, but also the public sector. All right, the amount of ratables, the way the islands have developed has a lot to do with the public services that people get. It has a lot to do with what kind of schools can be afforded, et cetera. So this is not only about the homeowner, it's not only about people can afford a home or not afford a home. It has to do with the fiscal health of the communities as well as what kind of commercial sector gets developed on the islands. Part of the subsidies have gone to homeowners, part of the subsidies have gone to businesses, and part of the subsidies have gone to higher tax revenues. When the subsidies disappear, some of those, all of those sectors will feel a pinch, and what happens is what we've been able to do is to afford more than we will when flood insurance policies go up. So the subsidies have come from outside the community, have come from the general tax fund, through the program, subsidize these communities. When those subsidies go away, the cost of risk will be borne more by the communities than, of course, than it has been on the country as a whole and the taxpayer. So now there's a shift of risk, there's a shift of cost going on from the macro version. Think of your community on its own. Your community now is going to have to accept a bigger risk and have to pay more for that risk. And that is where some of the problems that Jerry talked about come up. And by the way, there's nothing more evil to me about nature's ravishes than a Wawa being flooded there. All right. The other thing we know, statement of fact, is that if you leave people alone, they will underinsure. People will study, and study shows when you ask people to what the level of risk is, they will underinsure. And we'll talk about that as being one of the reasons why, in fact, there has been a public flood insurance policy as we go. Thank you. All right, well, we're going to talk about what are the impacts that we have observed. Atlantic City Press had a good article the other day on number of homes that are being sold and the prices. Talk a little bit about that. How might higher flood insurance rates impact fiscal health of shore communities? Why is flood insurance provided by the federal government, as we just hinted at? And is there a future for the private market, which folks have talked about a little bit? And what might the impact of an affordability study be? And what should be the subsidies involved when that affordability study is done? Affordability study is mandated in Biggert-Waters, is to be done by the federal government's own National Institute of somebody, I can't remember who, but there will be an affordability study. There was a study done by the Wharton School in 2013, which you can get, that goes over some of the pieces of that. We'll go right ahead. One of the things we've been tracking is what's happening to prices in the home market. And like I said, the Atlantic City Press had a pretty good article on that. What we do is take the shore homes and the offshore homes and look at the price increases that have taken place. And then we try to estimate, as several studies have done, what part of home value has disappeared because of the increased risk or the perception of increased risk. So in Atlantic County, this is the one that we've done. That we looked at the onshore and offshore. And as you can see, the shore community prices have gone up at a slower rate, or in fact, some have declined. And what you see at the end of that is that there's the estimates are anywhere from 6, 7, 8% of home value disappears with the anticipation of those higher values. Study done in Florida after several of the hurricanes in the 1990s showed that with anticipation of higher rates due to multiple claims, that in fact that number held up pretty well, that in communities that were having higher rates, had to adjust the higher rates, they saw anywhere between 5 and 8% of home values disappear. We've looked at that overall for places, some of the towns along the shore, but it is in fact documentable. Thank you. What might happen to the fiscal health of the community? The risk, again, does not change. It's being internalized by the community. That's what the law is doing to you. Viewed as a community, of course, the cost of abating that risk is higher. And as other folks have said, home ownership is all in. So if you raise the insurance rate, you can pay less mortgage. If you raise the tax rate, you can pay less insurance and less mortgage. You look at a house, as most people do, is the overall cost of ownership, and you go through that calculation. One of the problems that we know is many of the pre-firm homes, the older homes, owned by older folks, are paid for. And, you know, if you look at that scenario, you see that the next storm, should there be one anytime soon, is going to leave a lot of people without insurance. A lot of people have dropped the insurance and won't take the insurance. They figure, you know, as my mother of 93 says, let the next owner worry about it. And so, you know, you look at that scenario and you see that should there be a storm soon, it could have far worse consequences in terms of the individuals involved as we go. Okay, why is flood insurance provided by the government? The scenarios in the 60s and when flood insurance was being expanded actually was a realization that when half the town flooded or part of the town flooded, whether it was Johnstown or inland or along the shore, what that did was it left the rest of the town holding the bag. Somebody had to pick up the slack, somebody had to pay more taxes, somebody had to still pay for the public services, even though you had part of the community that either disappeared or its value disappeared. So the government stepped in and said, okay, we will offer flood insurance to everybody or mandate it in some cases. And when we do that then, and there's some kind of catastrophe, then the part of the community that survives will not have to carry the full burden. And so if you look at that, you realize that part of this issue is that what happens to your neighbor influences what happens to you. And hence we get to the basis of why there's a public flood insurance policy and not a complete private market. Let's ask the simple questions. You own a house. Should I raise my house now? If I don't, it's going to be down value, be reassessed at a lower value. If that happens, your neighbor gets hurt. So the individual decisions that are made by homeowners to elevate a house, not elevate a house, to improve it, not improve it, are going to affect the whole tax base, affect your neighbors as well as your own basis. All right? And so you can see that friends I have go through this calculation all the time. Well, I'll raise it when I'm ready to sell it. I'll pay lower taxes now, raise it when I'm ready to sell it. Or I'll raise it now and pay a lower flood insurance, and they go through that calculation all the time, saying, okay, what's it better to do? What's going to happen? How much longer am I going to own the house, et cetera, and go through that calculation. So in fact, the problem is a classic one in economics. It's a moral hazard and a public good, and that is that the decisions made at individual levels affect the entire community. And decisions made by your neighbor to improve the property or not to improve the property will eventually affect your tax rate and the tax base of your community and the public services that can be paid for. Okay. What might affordability study do? The affordability studies most people think is, okay, we'll subsidize the rates for people with low incomes. Easy enough. People can't afford it. We'll give subsidies for low income folks. The question is then, what's the better thing to do? And I look at this not as affordability, but as transition. How can we help the community as well as the individuals abate the risks that are going to have to be paid for? And the answer is that, it's Wharton's answer, not mine, so please. The answer is what you do in terms of rebates, in terms of subsidies that go with the affordability study. You put those on, you let people improve the property. You give them money to improve the property, not to help them afford the flood insurance better, so that they can have a lower flood insurance, but that the community benefits by the property being improved. That would, there's also a piece of that if you take the logic that we presented, that national flood insurance and all of this impacted both the business community and the fiscal impact and the homeowner. Any kind of affordability study and any kind of program that comes from that needs to address all three of those sectors. And probably the best way to do that, in fact, is to subsidize, in fact, elevation of buildings or building up to the code at the local BFE and 2 feet above, whatever it is. So people ask what's going to look like, and Jerry's talked about some of that. What will the communities look like under a regiment that eventually gets to the elimination of most of these subsidies? All right. And there's a couple studies that were done way back in 2006, sounds like a long time ago, on what happened, what kind of development patterns were encouraged by NFIP, and what kind of development patterns would come about if the flood insurance policies were no longer subsidized. And here's the way I look at it. There will be 2 periods. There'll be a rather long adjustment period, and that'll wait for people who own houses to leave, for new owners to come in and improve the property, the turnover of properties. There'll be a long transition period where ratables will be hurt. At the end of the day, that transition period will be less harmful in that buildings will be brought up. There'll be different people in your communities, but those buildings will be improved, and at the end of the day, the rateable base will be improved. It won't be brought back to where it was. Remember, you're going to pay more insurance. That's going to come out of the worth of the house eventually, those payments. But in fact, after the transition period, we should see some of these very bad impacts go away. It is in the middle where people decide not to improve their homes. People decide to walk away from the homes. People decide that they're going to wait and do something that's really the problem. So if there's an affordability study, one would think that that's more likely or would be better to be a transition study to move people through that phase, to address the fiscal health of those communities as well. I see the latest Sandy aid, the planning's come out for municipalities that have suffered rateable losses or ones that are eligible for that. I think that's a good direction to move in. So what will happen is a long transition period. Certainly, wealthier people are going to live at the shore if those subsidies go away. Certainly, the houses on the near shore will be valued higher as people elect to buy more house instead of paying more insurance. They'll move to the Rio Grandes of the world and the Dennis Townships of the world. Should be people that benefit from this. The question that's really open is on the commercial sector. Overall, people will be wealthier. Will they buy more? Will it change the mix? That's commercial sector. Will the commercial sector, will those businesses themselves be helped? How will this transition help those businesses come up to what will be come up to code so that they don't get hit by the higher rates either. So all in all, there's two periods coming. The near term doesn't look good. I don't think we're not going to see the subsidies go away. It's just going to be a matter of how they're going to go away and how people are going to cope with them. And at the end of the day, as people turn over their houses and as time changes, those improvements will be made and make some changes out there. So I'll finish with that. And if anybody will take questions later, I suppose. Thank you.